Good afternoon. I wanted to welcome you to the first lecture in our course on nonviolence and social movements. Reverend Lawson has been teaching with the UCLA Labor Center this very course for the past 20 years, and it has been a transformational course for so many of our students who have talked about how it deepened their understanding and appreciation of the philosophy of nonviolence, but beyond that, that it was a very important course to understand the rich legacy of social justice movements over the years and to explore ways that our students themselves can become change makers in the world around us. And we are very pleased that the first lecture follows on the film that we just showed on love and solidarity. And the theme of the first lecture is Soul Force and the Nonviolent Movement of America from 1953 to 1973. So I am very pleased to introduce my good friend, Reverend James Lawson, Jr.
And I'm very pleased to again commend Kent Wong for our class and express how much I appreciate our 21 plus years of collegiality and work together in various ways, not only at UCLA, but across Los Angeles itself, and our common contributions to the development of a labor movement in the United States that is a movement with a large vision for itself and for our country. And welcome to all of you who are students for this class in the 2022 version of our class. I want to begin by saying to all of you that the most important result of your being in higher education is that you will make some profound decisions about who you are and what is the meaning of your life and what kind of life you want to live. That's a prerequisite, I maintain, for every human being. That begins usually after puberty or age 12, but in the years of your being in college, it's going to be a very acute time for you to be working on who am I, what does my life mean, and what kind of life ought I to live. And so with that light, I want to then say to you that you are a life singularity. Singularity is a term that I've learned from the cosmologist and the astrophysicist over the last decade or so. And I mean it, I use it to mean that a life singularity, you have been endowed by the Creator. In Hebrew Christian traditions and scriptures, we call that Creator God. The Declaration of Independence in its preamble calls that Creator. You have been endowed by the Creator with all the stuff of life itself that you need for your life journey, and to allow your life to become a confident and fulfilling thing, to become fully alive, fully aware, fully able to love yourself and to love your neighbor as yourself, and to be therefore an instrument of love and truth in the world. which incidentally, I want you to know means to be a nonviolent or soul force human being all your days. Of course, I want you to be very much aware of the name Mohandas K. Gandhi, who at the turn of the 20th century is the person around 1906, 1908 or so, coined the phrase nonviolence. He tells us in one of the books that I've read by him, Nonviolence in War and Peace, Volume 1, which I purchased in India back in the early 1950s. He tells us that he translated an ancient word from Indian religion, Jainism, ahimsa. He translated that term as nonviolence. Ahimsa, about 600 years maybe before Jesus of Nazareth, sculptured the spiritual, moral, political, ethical notion that all life is sacred, that all life is connected. Therefore, ahimsa meant do no harm, do not wrong life, even the tiniest form of life. Consider life as a spiritual, moral matter that you must respect in fullness of your energy. So Gandhi told some friends of mine in 1936, before I was thinking of these matters, that I translated the ancient Jain word ahimsa, ahimsa, into non-violence. Gandhi writes further, the N-O-N dash non-violence, the non in English is usually a negative, but I place the non in front of violence and it is a positive. So now that may be hard for you to get your mind around, but I want you to think with this extraordinary Eastern Indian scholar, student, father of nonviolence. Nonviolence is not therefore to be translated as against violence. It is to be translated as for love and truth made practical in human behavior, especially in conflict. That is, in some ways, Gandhi also wrote this, the love of God as described in the term love in the New Testament used by Jesus and others. That translation that word meaning agape in the Greek, but that word meaning in fact, love of creation, the love of God, God's love for you and all creation in the universe that God created. So agape love, it is used for every human being. Our creation is a gift of creation or of the Creator, the gift of life. The gift of life is a gift of God, and you are a life singularity. And that gift of life is extraordinarily powerful, beyond most of our imagination. And one of the difficulties in our world, even yet today, is that we think that the life has no power, that life has to be translated into dollars. Life has to be translated into power, into political position, or life has to be translated into military force. No, 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 no. Gandhi insists, love is love. It does not need to be modeled in anything else but love. That in fact, violence is anti-love. Hatred is anti-love. So part of my learning over the decades has been that in the United States, many of us have been too much shaped by the spiritual poisons and the ideologies of racism, sexism or male chauvinism, male domination, violence, and plantation capitalism. These four forces are the opposite of love and truth. Nonviolence can also be called soul force, love force, truth force. And one of the other words that Gandhi helped to invent for understanding what he was talking about is the word satyagraha, 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 some pronounce it. Satyagraha is the combination of two Sanskrit words that Gandhi invented, adopted to spell out what nonviolence is about, satyagraha. Satya meaning love force, truth force. Can also be interpreted as life force, God force. Graha meaning tenacity, strength, power. So satyagraha is the second term that Gandhi invented to describe this business that we call nonviolence. I want to very quickly portray three events in my own life that led me into nonviolence. At age 4, my family moved to Massillon, Ohio, where we lived in a house on Tremont Street. And at age 4, on the streets of Massillon, we were a biracial community. In other words, it was a majority white, but at probably at least maybe as much as 10% was Black. And we Black and white children who lived side by side in the 5-block area, there could have been as many as 20 or 30 of us who became playmates in the summertime and in the winter playmates, and then went to the same school and everything else. Within the first months of my being in that address, one of my neighbor playmates, my age, and I were on the street, Tremont, maybe a block away from where we live, on the street itself, playing in an empty lot. When suddenly that boy, who was one of the playmates in a group of about 20 or 30 of us, suddenly spoke to me in a hostile way using racist epithets. I, to this day, do not know what could have provoked it, but I went next to him immediately and hit him vigorously. What more if I did one or two uh, punches of my hands, I don't know, but I hit him vigorously. I was not allowed to use racist epithets about any people in our family. We did not use that language to people. And there were 9 of us children, my father and mother, who both insisted that we had to treat each other and all other people with respect and dignity. So we were not permitted to use nasty language to each other or to anybody else. I remember that event. Then at age about 7 or 8 in the 4th grade, I was sent on an errand by my mother on Main Street, which was only maybe 3 blocks away. And as I ran that errand, I passed on this beautiful May day a car that was parked with its windows wide open and a youngster in the front seat who, as he saw me coming around the corner onto Main Street, stood up in the seat, stuck his head out of the window, and yelled an epithet at me. Again, racist. I went over and smacked him. Since I was running an errand, I spent no time delay, but ran on and finished the errand. When I came back, I was resolved to talk to his parents, but the car was gone when I came back. Anyway, I went home, and for the first time, I've mentioned that incident to my mother. Such an incident, 2 or 3 of my sisters and brothers and I had, usually on the street and a park. Never in any school at all for me, I know. Anyway, as I reported the errand to my mother and then told this incident to her, she asked me, Jimmy, what good did that do? And she gave me a long soliloquy about who we were, who I was, what my father and her expected of me, and how they saw me, and how God saw me, and how we were followers of Jesus. So what good did that do? And she ended up by saying that none of that stuff can harm me. And her last sentence to me was then, there must be a better way, than using fists and fighting against when racial epithets were used against us. And I heard myself, as my mother challenged me, I heard myself saying that I would never again fight on the playground or in sports or on the street. I never again would do that. And I also heard myself saying, I will find a better way. And I swore off of fighting, either in sports with anger or anywhere else. And she had mentioned the teachings of Jesus. And I said to myself, I will figure out what that is, and I will follow that teaching. And then the third incident I want to relate to you personally, my journey, is in 1947 when I entered Baldwin Wallace College in Berea, Ohio, as a freshman. There was a lecturer from the history department in early September by the name of A.J. Musty of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And A.J. delivered this lecture for all of the people taking history on the campus. And he lectured against war, World War II, and he also used Gandhi and talked about Gandhi's definition and intervention of nonviolence and how nonviolence was the future hope of the world and are not destroying ourselves. A.J. Musty and I at that lecture became staunch friends. He became one of my mentors, for which I'm grateful. Person I talked to and saw often after that, and who in fact led me into very good work situations from time to time as his advice. So that's briefly my journey then. As a college student, 1947, I called what I did, how I was living, the nonviolence of Jesus that I was practicing. I began then to call that nonviolence. After that lecture, I went and found the book on Gandhi of India and read it, and read his autobiography as well, and then became a student of Gandhi. So let me now simply define nonviolence again as love force or the powers of love being expressed in daily behavior and or in campaigns for truth and justice. And so I've lived my own entire life from my college days on, resisting racism, dismantling it wherever I could, resisting sexism, being a pioneer for equal rights for women and the end of male domination chauvinism. And so I have never been in behavior a sexist, treating women as second-class citizens or as objects of sex. I had 5 older sisters, so I was nudged into that way of living anyway. So I've personally been long one against every form of male chauvinism and sexism. And then I've been a person always opposed to every form of violence, mental, ideological violence, as well as the violence of the fist, violence of the gun or the club, or violence of angry words. And I should say at the same moment that all my life I've been a sportsman. I love football. I love to play it. I love to play touch football far into my adult years. I loved personally boxing. I just say that. Joe Louis was one of my models as a man, heavyweight champion. But Sugar Ray Robinson, who was of the same generation, was the finest boxer I think the world has ever seen. Someone who later on, another one of my boxing heroes, Muhammad Ali, imitated and improved upon. He from Sugar Ray Robinson. So I'm still a lover of sports in various ways. So I follow it mostly on the sports pages rather than by seeing many games at all anymore. And of course, too old to play any of them. The last time I went out to basketball, the last time I played ping pong, which was just 2 or 3 years ago, I went to do a return of all and fell flat on my face. And I haven't tried to play table tennis since then. So anyway, to make a long story short, this is a sort of a brief purview. Nonviolence can be defined as satyagraha. Nonviolence can be defined as love and the powers of love being discovered and exercised in daily living and in the solving of conflictive problems. And then the final word I'm going to say in this lecture is, and that I want you also to see nonviolence as a science of how we human beings can love the creative gifts of life and use the creative gifts of life and love to solve issues of racism and injustice, and to cultivate life as a huge force of truth and freedom and hope and community in our lives and for our lives. So it becomes a lifestyle, but it also becomes a science with a massive history of effectiveness that is still being recovered. A science with more than 300 tactics that can be used. I'll do this in the part of the course. Over 300 different tactics are now available for us that people have used across the centuries that can be called nonviolent methods or nonviolent tactics. And I would hope during the course of this quarter, you would really dig in to the definitions of nonviolence, to the tactics of nonviolence, to some of the campaigns that have been very effective, to some of the scholars who have written about it and continue to write about it. And it might even be that someone in the class is going to want to do graduate work in the field of nonviolent history, theory, and practice. We do now have at least 2 universities that offer PhDs in nonviolence in the country. We have any number of universities and colleges that are teaching Gandhi and King, and apparently nonviolent struggle from those angles. So I hope you will give every attention to the course that you're in, and that for many of you it will be an intellectual journey as well as a life and moral journey.
Thank you so much, Reverend Lawson, for our first lecture on nonviolence and social movements. I wanted to encourage our students who have not yet picked up the 3 textbooks for our class. Please do so. The first is Revolutionary Nonviolence, a new publication that was just released by UC Press. The second is Nonviolence and Social Movements, which is a publication that came out of a graduate seminar that Reverend Lawson and I taught a number of years ago. And the third is the book, A Force More Powerful, that also has an excellent documentary series accompanying that book. So please purchase the 3 textbooks for our class, and I encourage you to read in preparation for lecture and discussion section each week. Please attend your discussion sections tomorrow. That'll be the first day of the discussions, and you'll be joined by Emily Rauda, Lily Kane, and Yaritza Gonzalez, who will all be running the discussion sections in person tomorrow on Thursday. So we will see you next week on our lecture on the Montgomery bus boycott. Thanks very much.